The day they left me. Chapter summary. My 3 adult children place me in a nursing home, believing they are securing their future by taking control of what they think is my modest estate. They never realize I have already made one final legal decision that will determine every dollar after I'm gone. Target word count, 600 words at exactly 10:15 a.m. On September 8th, my youngest son slid a stack of papers across the polished oak desk and said, "Mom, this is for your own good." The words were gentle. His eyes were not. The administrator adjusted her glasses while the clock above her office door ticked with quiet precision. Outside the window, late summer sunlight warmed the flower beds surrounding the nursing home, making the place look far kinder than it felt. Fresh coffee lingered in the air, mixing with the faint scent of disinfectant. Everything appeared peaceful. Nothing about that morning was peaceful. My daughter folded her arms and avoided looking directly at me. She had always hated uncomfortable conversations, especially when honesty required sacrifice. My oldest son stood near the doorway checking his expensive watch every few minutes, more concerned about missing a business meeting than leaving his mother behind. "I'll be fine," I said calmly. My voice surprised even me. There was no anger hiding inside it. No pleading. No bitterness. Only certainty. They exchanged relieved glances, mistaking my composure for surrender. They thought they were winning. What they didn't know was that I had already accepted this moment long before any of them walked into that office. 3 weeks earlier, I had met privately with my attorney at exactly 2:30 p.m. We reviewed every page of my estate documents, every investment record, and every instruction connected to my family's financial future. Before leaving his office, I signed one final amendment with steady hands. That signature mattered far more than the ones my children were writing now. As my youngest finished the admission paperwork, he smiled politely at the administrator. "We'll visit every weekend," he promised. I recognized that promise immediately. It sounded exactly like every promise people make when they hope guilt will disappear before responsibility returns. The administrator nodded, unaware of the history sitting quietly across from her desk. My children believed my entire estate totaled $184,000 after taxes and expenses. They had discussed that number often enough when they assumed I wasn't listening. They spoke about selling my house, dividing the savings, and finally putting old family arguments behind them. Money has a remarkable way of disguising itself as concern. I simply listened. None of them knew that decades earlier, my late grandfather had established a private family trust that had grown, year after year, through disciplined investments and careful stewardship. By the time that September morning arrived, its value had quietly reached $12,800,000. The trust had never been about wealth alone. It had always been about character. And character was being tested right in front of me. After the final document was signed, my daughter leaned down and kissed my forehead. "This is the safest place for you." I smiled softly. "I hope you always remember today." She assumed I meant the sadness of the moment. I meant something entirely different. One by one, they walked toward the parking lot without looking back. I watched through the window as their vehicles disappeared beyond the front gate. Silence settled around me like a heavy blanket, but it did not break me. It strengthened me. A nurse gently touched my shoulder and asked whether I needed anything. I looked toward my handbag resting beside the chair. Inside was nothing except a family photograph and a certified copy of the final legal instruction my attorney had already filed. The document had become legally effective the instant my children completed my admission. They believed they had abandoned an old woman. They had absolutely no idea they had just activated my final decision. Love with Conditions Chapter Summary. I look back on the years that slowly taught me love could become transactional inside a family. My husband prized reputation above character, my children learned the same lesson, and an outsider earned their confidence while quietly positioning himself between us. People assume betrayal begins with one terrible decision. It doesn't. It begins with hundreds of small moments that seem harmless until you finally connect them years later. As I unpacked my few belongings in the nursing home, every folded sweater and faded photograph carried me backward through time. The room was quiet except for the distant hum of an air conditioner and the squeak of a medication cart rolling down the hallway. Silence has a way of uncovering memories that busy lives keep buried. When I married my husband, Harold, I believed we were building a future together. He was disciplined, ambitious, and respected throughout our community. People admired the polished suits he wore and the confidence he carried into every room. Behind our front door, however, appearances mattered more than affection. People are always watching, he often reminded me. He wasn't wrong. He simply cared more about being admired than being understood. As a dark-skinned black woman, I learned early that even family could carry quiet prejudices. Harold never spoke openly about color, but his compliments always drifted toward lighter skin, straighter hair, and features he considered more presentable. Our daughter, Alicia, inherited those traits. She became the center of every family celebration without asking for it. New dresses appeared for her birthdays. Extra photographs were framed on the living room wall. Compliments followed her wherever she walked. I never blamed her. Children don't create favoritism. Adults do. My two sons noticed it too, although neither ever questioned it. They simply accepted the invisible rules that governed our home. Success meant pleasing their father. Loyalty meant agreeing with him. Love was measured by obedience. I chose peace more often than confrontation. Looking back, I sometimes wonder whether my silence protected them or simply delayed the truth. While Harold expanded our family business, I handled the work few people noticed. I reviewed invoices after midnight, balanced accounts before sunrise, negotiated supplier contracts, and quietly invested surplus income whenever opportunities appeared. Every careful decision strengthened our financial foundation. No one applauded those moments. They simply expected them. Years later, Harold introduced us to a financial advisor named Richard Collins. He arrived with expensive cufflinks, polished shoes, and an effortless smile that made everyone feel important. Everyone except me. I've helped families multiply wealth for decades, he said during our first meeting. Your children will inherit far more than you ever imagined. Harold smiled immediately. So you're exactly who we need. I watched instead of speaking. Richard understood numbers, but he understood people even better. He knew exactly which compliments to offer and which insecurities to reinforce. Within months he had become a regular guest at family dinners, holiday gatherings, and business meetings. My children admired him. Harold trusted him. I questioned him. That made me the problem. One afternoon, after reviewing an investment proposal, I pointed towards several unusual clauses buried inside the agreement. "I don't like these transfer provisions," I said calmly. "They give away too much control." Richard leaned back in his chair with a patient smile. "Mrs. Johnson, modern finance can seem complicated if you haven't worked with institutional portfolios." His tone remained polite. His meaning did not. Before I could answer, my oldest son spoke first. "Mom, Richard does this professionally." Alicia nodded. "Maybe we should trust the expert." I looked around the conference room and realized no one was asking whether I understood the documents. They had already decided I didn't. Richard folded his hands. "I know change feels uncomfortable." "It isn't change that concerns me," I replied. "It's unnecessary authority." For a brief moment, his smile disappeared. Then it returned even wider. They noticed the smile. I noticed the hesitation. From that day forward, every important financial conversation somehow happened without me. Draft agreements appeared already prepared. Investment summaries arrived after decisions had been discussed. Questions about company assets became shorter, while suggestions that I retire from business matters became increasingly common. They believed they were protecting me from stress. What they didn't know was that I had built enough businesses to recognize manipulation long before it became visible. The pressure grew steadily. "Mom," Alicia said one evening, "why don't you let Richard manage everything? You deserve to relax." My youngest son added, "You've carried this responsibility long enough." Richard remained silent. Sometimes silence persuades people more effectively than words. I thanked them for their concern and changed the subject. Inside, however, I began documenting everything. Every recommendation. Every signature request. Every unusual transaction. Every conversation. Not because I expected a battle. Because I believed preparation was cheaper than regret. Only one person understood why my instincts refused to quiet down. My attorney, Benjamin Carter, had known me for more than 30 years. He had reviewed every trust amendment, every property acquisition, and every succession plan my family ever created. He listened without interrupting as I explained my concerns. When I finally finished, he remained unusually quiet. Then he opened his desk drawer, removed a large cream-colored envelope, and placed it gently between us. His expression carried none of its usual warmth. Instead, it carried certainty. He looked directly into my eyes and said, "Promise me you won't open this until they believe they've won." The quiet transformation the first night inside the nursing home felt unnaturally still. The hallway lights dimmed at exactly 9 p.m., leaving soft pools of amber light stretching across the polished floor. Somewhere down the corridor, a television played an old jazz concert while a nurse whispered reassuring words to another resident. The faint scent of lavender cleaner lingered in the air. It should have been comforting. Instead, it forced me to hear every thought I had spent years ignoring. I sat beside the window with a blanket across my lap, watching rain collect on the glass. My children had not called. They had not texted. They had not asked whether I had unpacked or eaten dinner. For the first time, I stopped making excuses for them. Love does not disappear overnight. It fades beneath repeated choices. I had spent years believing they were busy, overwhelmed, distracted by careers and families of their own. Every missed birthday dinner, every canceled visit, every conversation that somehow drifted toward money, I explained them away because mothers are remarkably skilled at protecting the people who hurt them. That evening, I finally admitted the truth. They did not love me the way I loved them. They loved what they believed I could leave behind. Oddly enough, that realization did not make me cry. It made me clear. The next morning, after breakfast, I unlocked the drawer beside my bed and removed the cream-colored envelope Benjamin Carter had given me weeks earlier. His instructions echoed in my memory. Promise me you won't open this until they believe they've won. They believed exactly that now. Carefully breaking the seal, I spread the contents across the small writing desk beneath the window. At the top rested a revised trust agreement bearing my signature and Benjamin's. Beneath it lay an ownership schedule listing companies, investment partnerships, and commercial properties my children had never known existed. Every asset had been legally organized through structures designed decades earlier to preserve our family's legacy. Near the bottom rested encrypted financial records stored on secured drives. Finally, I picked up a simple black flash drive. It looked ordinary. It was anything but ordinary. Benjamin had labeled it with only one word: evidence. Later that afternoon, he arrived carrying a leather briefcase and the calm expression that had reassured me for more than 30 years. "Have you opened everything?" he asked. "I have." "And?" "I understand now why you waited." He nodded slowly. "What you're holding isn't just documentation. It's protection." Benjamin connected the flash drive to his encrypted laptop. File after file appeared across the screen. Recorded emails. Financial transfers. Internal memoranda. Meeting notes. Hidden commission agreements. Each document painted the same disturbing picture. Richard Collins had quietly manipulated financial decisions involving several minority-owned family estates over many years. On paper, every transaction appeared legitimate. Together, however, they revealed a pattern of concealed fees, conflicts of interest, and misleading recommendations that benefited him while diminishing generational wealth. "What they don't realize," Benjamin said quietly, "is that greed always leaves fingerprints." I studied the records without speaking. Richard had always hidden behind confidence, polished language, and expensive suits. My children mistook confidence for integrity. I never did. Benjamin opened another folder. "I've already preserved every digital record under attorney-client privilege where appropriate and arranged independent forensic accounting reviews." "You expected this." I hoped I was wrong. So did I. For several moments neither of us spoke. Rain tapped softly against the windows. Outside, gardeners trimmed flower beds as residents walked peaceful circles around the courtyard. Anyone watching would have assumed I was simply another elderly woman adjusting to a quieter life. They had absolutely no idea my future was becoming far more active than my past. Over the following weeks, Benjamin and I met regularly. Sometimes inside the nursing home's small library. Sometimes in a private conference room. Sometimes by secure video conference when weather prevented travel. Each meeting strengthened the legal walls protecting my decisions. Trust amendments were finalized. Corporate voting rights were confirmed. Ownership records were independently certified. Digital evidence was duplicated and secured in multiple locations. Nothing happened dramatically. That was precisely the point. Real strategy rarely announces itself. Meanwhile, life outside those walls continued exactly as my children expected. They began discussing renovations to my house before anything had legally changed. Richard attended meetings with increasing confidence. Alicia proudly spoke about simplifying the family's financial future. My sons praised Richard's vision whenever anyone questioned another investment recommendation. They celebrated victories that did not exist. What they didn't know was that every confident step carried them closer to consequences they had unknowingly created themselves. Occasionally, one of my children called. Their conversations always sounded warm. "How are they treating you, Mom?" "Very well." "Do you need anything?" "I'm comfortable." Then came the question that never failed to appear. "Has Benjamin stopped by lately?" I smiled each time before answering. No reason for him to. The silence that followed always told me more than words could. They believed I had surrendered. I had simply stopped explaining myself. One afternoon, Benjamin closed his briefcase after another successful meeting. "Everything is ready," he said. I looked around the quiet room. Sunlight poured through tall windows, illuminating shelves filled with forgotten novels. Residents laughed over a card game in the next room while a volunteer played gentle piano music in the lobby. Peace surrounded me. So did preparation. I folded the revised trust agreement, returned the flash drive to its protective case, and locked both inside my drawer. For the first time in months, I felt no anger. Only resolve. They thought the nursing home had become my prison. In reality, it had become my command center. Chapter 4. The meeting they couldn't control. The elevator doors opened precisely at 8:58 a.m. on November 14th, and I stepped into the marble lobby of Carter, Ellis Monroe. The polished floors reflected the morning light pouring through the glass facade, while quiet conversations echoed beneath the high ceilings. Every measured step reminded me that I was no longer walking into a family discussion. I was walking into the final chapter of a carefully documented legal process. My navy suit fit exactly as it had the day it was tailored. It wasn't chosen to impress anyone. It was chosen to remind me that dignity is its own form of armor. Benjamin Carter greeted me with a respectful nod. "Good morning." "It is," I replied. "Let's finish this." The conference room doors opened at exactly 9 a.m. Inside sat trust executives, senior accountants, banking representatives, charitable foundation directors, respected community leaders, and retired judges who had agreed to witness the estate proceedings. Their quiet professionalism filled the room with an unmistakable seriousness. Across the table sat my 3 children. None of them smiled. Richard Collins leaned comfortably in his chair with the confidence of a man convinced the outcome had already been decided. "There she is," he said with a faint laugh. I was beginning to wonder whether the nursing home would allow field trips. A few uncomfortable glances moved around the table. I remained standing until Benjamin invited me to my seat. Richard folded his hands. "I believe we should move efficiently. Mrs. Johnson's remaining assets should be transferred before unnecessary complications arise." My oldest son nodded immediately. "That's what Mom wanted." I looked at him quietly. He truly believed that. Benjamin opened a leather portfolio. "Before we discuss distributions, we'll review several governing documents." Richard interrupted with an easy smile. "With respect, Counselor, I think we're overcomplicating matters. The estate isn't particularly complex." My daughter leaned forward. "We've already discussed most of this." Benjamin simply replied, "We'll proceed according to legal protocol." Silence settled across the room. Richard looked toward me again. "I know financial matters can become confusing at this stage of life. Fortunately, professionals are here to help." He smiled as though he had offered kindness. Instead, he had offered arrogance. My youngest son shifted uneasily. "Mom, nobody is trying to take advantage of you." "I know," I answered calmly. My voice contained neither accusation nor forgiveness. Only certainty. Richard continued speaking. "Questions about competency occasionally arise when significant documents appear late in life. If necessary, those issues can certainly be examined." The implication hung in the room. He wasn't questioning my paperwork. He was questioning my mind. Benjamin looked toward me. I simply gave a small nod. Without saying a single word, I opened my briefcase, removed a plain black flash drive, and placed it in the center of the conference table. The tiny device made almost no sound against the polished wood. Yet every conversation stopped instantly. Richard's smile faded for the first time that morning. Benjamin reached forward and connected the drive to the secure presentation system. The first screen displayed a revised trust agreement bearing my signature, notarization records, and filing confirmations completed months earlier. Benjamin spoke carefully. These amendments were executed in full compliance with state trust law. Another document appeared. Ownership schedules. Commercial property records. Corporate voting rights. Investment partnership certificates. Each page revealed assets my children had never known existed. Their expressions changed one by one. Confusion. Disbelief. Concern. Richard straightened in his chair. "I've never seen these documents." Benjamin replied, "That statement has been recorded." Richard blinked. "What?" "This meeting is being transcribed." Benjamin advanced to the next file. Independent forensic accounting reports filled the screen. Detailed timelines connected transfers, advisory recommendations, undisclosed compensation, and internal communications involving Richard's consulting firm. Richard laughed awkwardly. "This proves nothing." Benjamin calmly selected another file. An email appeared. Then another. Meeting notes. Contract revisions. Commission schedules. Each document fit precisely beside the previous one until a clear pattern emerged. Richard began speaking more quickly. Industry practices are often misunderstood. Benjamin said nothing. Richard continued. Clients authorize recommendations all the time. Still no interruption. He leaned forward. If people failed to read disclosures, that isn't my responsibility. The room remained completely silent. Only then did Richard realize every sentence was becoming part of the official record. He had started building his own defense. Instead, he was strengthening the evidence against himself. What he didn't know was that Benjamin had anticipated exactly this reaction. Another recording played. Richard's own voice discussed concealed compensation arrangements and the vulnerability of families unfamiliar with complex financial structures. No one around the table spoke. Several executives quietly exchanged notes. One retired judge removed his glasses and slowly folded his hands. The atmosphere had completely changed. My children stared between the documents and Richard, searching desperately for an explanation capable of repairing what they were witnessing. None existed. Benjamin closed the final presentation folder. He looked toward me. I simply remained seated. There was no satisfaction in my expression. No celebration. Justice never required performance. Benjamin finally turned toward my children. His voice remained calm, steady, and unmistakably final. According to your mother's final decision. He paused just long enough for the silence to settle across the room. None of you inherit a single dollar. Chapter 5. The price of arrogance. The silence after Benjamin's announcement felt heavier than any argument I had ever witnessed. No one rushed to speak. No one reached for another document. Even the faint hum of the ventilation system seemed louder than the stunned expressions surrounding the conference table. Morning sunlight reflected across polished wood, illuminating stacks of legal binders that suddenly carried more weight than anyone had expected. My oldest son broke the silence first. There has to be some mistake. Benjamin folded his hands. There is no mistake. My daughter stared at me as though she were looking at a stranger. You can't mean this. I met her eyes without anger. I spent years meaning exactly what I said. You simply stopped listening. Richard Collins shifted in his chair, trying to recover the confidence that had carried him into the room. This presentation is misleading, he insisted. Selective documents can create false impressions. Benjamin calmly nodded toward the rear of the conference room. Two federal financial investigators entered alongside independent forensic accountants and banking compliance specialists who had been waiting outside until their testimony became appropriate. Each introduced themselves for the official record before taking their seats. Richard's confident posture faltered. One investigator opened a thick report. Our review identified undisclosed compensation arrangements, concealed advisory fees, and repeated conflicts of interest involving multiple family trusts. Another investigator continued. Several transactions affected minority-owned family estates over a number of years. Richard interrupted. I followed accepted industry standards. The lead investigator responded without emotion. Our findings indicate otherwise. A banking auditor displayed transaction summaries on the presentation screen. Dates. Account numbers. Corporate entities. Commission schedules. Each document aligned with another until the pattern became impossible to dismiss. Richard leaned forward. You don't understand how these structures work. Benjamin quietly selected another recording. Richard's own voice filled the conference room. Older. Relaxed. Confident. He laughed before saying words that drained every remaining ounce of credibility from the room. Older black families are easy targets. They trust reputation more than paperwork. No one reacted immediately. Shock has its own silence. The recording continued as Richard described steering clients toward arrangements that generated higher private commissions while presenting them as sophisticated planning strategies. When the audio ended, no explanation could erase it. Richard lowered his eyes. For the first time since I had known him, he had nothing persuasive to say. He had destroyed himself with his own words. What he didn't know was that truth requires no performance once evidence begins speaking. My children looked from the investigators to me, searching for some indication that this nightmare could still be undone. My youngest son finally whispered, "Mom, why didn't you tell us?" I tried, I answered softly. You chose the voice that praised your expectations instead. My daughter covered her mouth. Tears gathered in her eyes. I never wanted this. No, I replied. You wanted certainty. You believed money guaranteed it. Benjamin opened the final trust schedule. The family trust currently holds assets valued at approximately $12.8 million. The number seemed to steal the remaining air from the room. My oldest son stared at the document. 12 million? I nodded once. It was never hidden from those willing to earn my trust. Benjamin continued reading. In accordance with the revised trust agreement, all distributable assets have been permanently assigned. The next pages listed each recipient. Scholarship endowments for first-generation Black college students. Business grants supporting Black entrepreneurs. Affordable housing initiatives. Community legal clinics. Charitable foundations dedicated to preserving generational wealth through education rather than inheritance. Each organization had already accepted the funding. Each transfer had already become legally effective. No amendment remained possible. Benjamin reached the final clause. Any beneficiary who knowingly abandoned, exploited, or attempted to manipulate the grantor for financial advantage is permanently disqualified from receiving trust distributions. Another long silence followed. My daughter looked directly at me. Please. One word. Nothing more. I was wrong. My oldest son stood. We can fix this. I slowly shook my head. Some things can be repaired. I paused before continuing. Others can only be accepted. He swallowed hard. We're your children. You are. Doesn't that matter? It always mattered to me. My voice remained calm. The question is whether it mattered to you when you believed my usefulness had ended. No one answered. The truth had already spoken. My daughter stepped closer. I should have visited. Yes. I should have listened. Yes. I should have believed you. Another quiet pause settled between us. Yes. She lowered her head. I thought Richard knew better. I know. I thought putting you in the nursing home was responsible. I know. I thought we'd have time. Her voice finally broke. I was wrong. I felt compassion. But compassion is not the same as permission. I forgive you, I said. 3 words. All sincere. Hope briefly returned to their faces. Then I finished the sentence. But forgiveness is not restoration. Confusion replaced hope. I continued. Forgiveness releases resentment. It does not erase consequences. It does not rewrite choices. It does not restore trust simply because regret arrives after exposure. No one argued. Even my children understood the difference. Across the room, Harold sat motionless. For years he had built his identity around reputation, influence, and appearances. Community respect had mattered more to him than private honesty. Now respected judges, bankers, civic leaders, and charitable directors had witnessed the collapse of everything he believed prestige could protect. His shoulders sagged. Not because he had lost money. Because he had lost the image he spent a lifetime constructing. My daughter looked toward him. He could not meet her eyes. The family that once celebrated appearances now sat surrounded by undeniable facts. Status had finally surrendered to truth. Benjamin closed the final binder. The proceedings are complete. No applause followed. Justice rarely arrives with celebration. It arrives with clarity. I gathered my documents carefully, placing each into my briefcase with steady hands. Months earlier I had entered the nursing home believing I had lost everything that mattered. Instead, I had discovered something far more valuable than wealth. Peace without illusion. As I stood, every eye in the room followed me. No one attempted another argument. No one questioned another signature. No one challenged another document. The evidence had ended every debate before it began. I looked once at my children. I truly hope your lives become better than the choices that brought you here. Then I turned toward the conference room door. I stood, gathered my papers, and spoke only 7 words. This was never revenge. It was accountability. Chapter 6. My final decision. Winter arrived quietly, carrying with it the kind of silence that only follows irreversible truth. 6 months had passed since the estate meeting, yet I could still remember the expressions around that conference table with remarkable clarity. Time had softened the sharp edges of betrayal, but it had never changed the lessons hidden beneath it. Those lessons had become far more valuable than the fortune I once believed would define my legacy. News of Richard Collins spread quickly through financial circles. State regulators suspended his professional licenses while federal prosecutors filed charges supported by years of documented evidence. Investigators uncovered additional victims whose stories echoed my own, revealing families persuaded to surrender control through carefully disguised advice and polished promises. Every interview, every audit, and every courtroom appearance stripped away another layer of the reputation he had spent decades constructing. He had spent his career convincing people that appearances created trust. In the end, documents spoke louder than charm. I never celebrated his downfall. Justice did not require celebration. It required completion. Harold changed after that meeting. For the first time in our long marriage, I watched a man who could no longer hide behind titles, expensive suits, or community recognition. Invitations stopped arriving. Board memberships quietly disappeared. The people who once admired his confidence suddenly remembered his silence whenever integrity had demanded courage. He passed away only a few months later. People praised his accomplishments during the memorial service. Very few mentioned his character. Standing in the back of the chapel, I realized there is a profound difference between being respected for success and being remembered for kindness. Only one of those survives a lifetime. My children faced consequences no court had imposed. Without the inheritance they expected, they discovered how fragile relationships become when they have been built upon entitlement instead of gratitude. Friends who once admired their lifestyle slowly disappeared. Business partners became distant. Even family gatherings grew smaller, quieter, and painfully honest. Each of them contacted me more than once. Sometimes through letters. Sometimes through phone calls. Sometimes through messages that began with apologies and ended with hope. I answered every letter. I accepted every apology. Forgiveness was never beyond my reach. Access to my trust was. Some doors should never be reopened once they have been closed by truth. Meanwhile, the life I had chosen for my wealth began unfolding in ways no balance sheet could measure. The first scholarship recipients graduated from college carrying dreams larger than debt. Young entrepreneurs opened neighborhood bookstores, construction companies, technology firms, medical clinics, and family restaurants with grants that expected nothing except integrity in return. Affordable housing projects welcomed families who had spent years searching for stability instead of temporary shelter. At every dedication ceremony, I remained in the audience rather than standing at the podium. Recognition had never been my goal. Opportunity was. Watching those communities grow taught me something extraordinary. Money given without wisdom often disappears. Opportunity given with purpose multiplies itself. That had always been the true meaning of generational wealth. One quiet afternoon in early spring, I visited Harold's grave. Fresh grass surrounded the polished stone while gentle wind moved through rows of oak trees. Birds sang somewhere beyond the cemetery gates, and sunlight warmed the cool marble beneath my fingertips. I stood there for several minutes without speaking. There was nothing left to argue about. Nothing left to prove. I thanked him silently for the good memories we once shared and released the disappointment I had carried for far too many years. Then I turned away. Not because I had forgotten. Because I had finally found peace. If you've listened to my story this far, I want to leave you with something far more valuable than an ending. Family is not measured by shared blood alone. It is measured by loyalty when no reward is waiting. By honesty when deception appears easier. By compassion when power makes cruelty possible. Wealth is a tool. It reveals character far more often than it creates it. If someone values your possessions more than your presence, believe what their actions are telling you before their words persuade you otherwise. Protect your peace. Protect your dignity. And never confuse forgiveness with permission to repeat the same betrayal. My children believed placing me in that nursing home marked the end of my story. They had absolutely no idea it was the beginning of the legacy I truly wanted to leave behind. I lost an inheritance meant for a family. I gained a future that belonged to an entire community. That was my final decision. And I have never regretted it. Never mistake my silence for weakness, because the quietest decision can echo for generations.